My name is Marlene Carter, and I am the widow of Cedar Hollow. Some say that like it's a curse, others whisper it like it's legend. But to me, it's simply the truth. I didn't choose that title, it was forced on me, the day I pulled a trigger and ended a life that had been strangling mine for nearly 3 decades. But before the trial, before the prison, before the silence that follows me now like a second skin, there was a girl. And she thought she was marrying safely. Before I go any further, I want to ask you, please, like, share, and make sure you subscribe. Stories like mine are hard to tell, but the truth deserves to be heard. I was 19, soft-hearted and naive, when I met Earl Carter. He was a man already settled into himself, 34 years old, with a reputation that stretched across Cedar County like the smell of cut hay in August. People said Earl knew how to run land, how to keep books straight, how to carry himself in a room. My mama said he'd make a fine husband because he was steady. I didn't know then that steady can mean immovable. Unyielding. Stone. Earl was tall, his voice carried in that slow drawl people in small towns mistake for authority. He could charm when he wanted, shake a man's hand firmly, tip his hat to a lady, nod in church like the sermon was written just for him. But his eyes gave him away. They weren't soft. They were calculating, like he was always measuring, always weighing. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes. What else was a girl like me supposed to say? I had no college, no savings, no daddy to lean on. Mama worked herself ragged at the diner just to keep the lights on. So when Earl offered me his farmhouse on Pinewood Road, I thought I'd been rescued. I didn't know yet that some rescues are just cages with lace curtains. The farmhouse looked perfect from the road, 2 stories, green shutters, wraparound porch. Folks said it was the prettiest place in Cedar Hollow. And maybe it was. But the walls held their secrets. At first, Earl played the part of husband well enough. He'd take me to church on Sundays, hand on the small of my back like I was something precious. But behind closed doors, that hand turned heavy. If supper wasn't hot enough, if I spent too long talking to the neighbor at the fence, if I looked at him the wrong way, his voice would harden, his fists would find me. Always in places where no one else would see. That was Earl's way. He never broke the picture frame. He only cracked the glass where it wouldn't show. I learned quickly. I learned to move quietly, to measure my words, to study his face before speaking. It became a kind of second language, reading the storm before it broke. Sometimes I thought I could keep the house calm if I just stayed small enough, silent enough. But storms don't ask permission. They roll through and take what they want. By the time Ruth, our daughter, was born, I had learned to smile through the pain. I stitched little dresses and rocked her in the evenings, humming lullabies over the sound of Earl pacing the floors. When Daniel came along 3 years later, I thought maybe 2 children might soften him. But Earl didn't soften. He hardened. He never struck the children. That wasn't his way. Instead, he carved at them with words the same way he carved at me. He told Ruth that women needed to know their place, told Daniel that crying was for the weak. And both of them, God forgive me, started to believe him. As the years rolled on, I faded into the wallpaper. Neighbors saw me at the feed store, at church, at the school bake sales. They said I was quiet, a good wife, a devoted mother. What they didn't see was the way my daughter's eyes turned cold toward me, or how my son flinched when I reached to touch his shoulder. Earl had stolen even them from me, twisting their loyalties until they saw me through his eyes. And still, I stayed. Because where could I go? Mama was gone by then, the house on Pine Street sold. The church ladies said marriage was hard work and prayed over me without ever asking why my smile never reached my eyes. And I told myself that leaving would mean shame, poverty, maybe worse. So I stayed. Stayed through the bruises. Stayed through the slammed doors. Stayed through the nights when Earl came home with whiskey on his breath and bitterness in his fists. But a woman can only stay quiet so long before something inside her begins to claw at the silence. For me, that clawing became a voice I couldn't ignore. It came late at night when I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, wondering if tomorrow I'd survive another day of his storms. It came when I saw the way Ruth looked at me like I was weak, when Daniel mimicked Earl's sharp tone. It came when I realized my children no longer belonged to me, they belonged to Earl, body and soul. And that voice, quiet but insistent, whispered a truth I'd buried deep. One day, Marlene, you're going to have to choose. Him or you. The choice came on a night when the air itself felt heavy, when the cicadas screamed loud enough to rattle the windows, when Earl's storm finally tore through every last bit of me I had left to give. That was the night I reached for the rifle. And nothing in Cedar Hollow would ever be the same. That was only the beginning of my story, the years of silence, the bruises hidden behind shutters, and the night I finally picked up that rifle. If you've been drawn in so far, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves powerful true stories, and subscribe to the channel. The night it happened still breathes in my bones. I can feel it even now, years later, sitting in this trailer with the tin roof rattling under the rain. It was July, and the air sat heavy as molasses. The cicadas outside screamed so loud it felt like the world itself was warning me. I'd been on edge all day. Earl's temper had been simmering, and when Earl simmered, it always boiled over by sundown. He came home late, the stink of whiskey on him. His boots hit the porch hard, each step a drumbeat of dread. I knew before he even opened the door that it would be one of those nights. Marlene, he barked, tossing his hat onto the table. What the hell have you been doing all day? The house looks like a pigsty. The house was spotless. It always was. But Earl didn't care about the truth. He only cared about control. I stood in the kitchen, hands trembling against the counter. Ruth and Daniel had long since learned to vanish when their daddy's voice took that edge. They were upstairs, silent as ghosts. Earl crossed the room in 2 strides, and his hand gripped my arm hard enough to leave tomorrow's bruise. You listening to me, woman? I nodded. Always nodding. Always swallowing my words. But that night, something cracked. Maybe it was the years of silence, the years of watching my children turn into shadows under his shadow. Maybe it was the way his eyes dared me to defy him, knowing I never would. Only this time, I did. Don't touch me, Earl, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. For a moment, he froze. His face went red, then dark, like a storm cloud swallowing the sky. His hand raised, slow, deliberate. I saw the strike before it came. And in that instant, something inside me screamed louder than the cicadas, enough. My eyes darted to the rifle propped by the back door. Earl had insisted on keeping it there, for varmints. Funny, how I became the varmint that night. I moved before I even knew I was moving. My hand wrapped around the wood stock, familiar and heavy. Earl's face twisted, part rage, part disbelief. You wouldn't dare, he spat. But he didn't know me anymore. Or maybe he never had. The shot rang out sharp and final. Earl staggered, shock flashing across his face before he crumpled to the floor. Just like that, the storm ended. The silence afterward was worse than the screaming. I stood there shaking, the rifle slipping from my hands. My children came running down the stairs, eyes wide, faces pale. Ruth screamed. Daniel cried. And in that moment, I knew, I hadn't just killed Earl. I'd lost them too. The sheriff's car pulled up before dawn. A neighbor had called, said they heard the shot. Said they always knew there was trouble in the Carter house. Funny how people know everything too late. They led me out in handcuffs, past the pecan tree, past the porch where I'd once rocked my babies to sleep. The same porch where Earl had kissed my cheek for the neighbors to see. I held my head high, even as the whole town gathered like vultures to watch. Down at the jailhouse, they questioned me. Asked why I did it. I told them the truth, 24 years of bruises and silence, of children turned against their own mother. But truth doesn't carry much weight when the man you shot has a reputation cleaner than his ledger books. By the time the trial came, Earl had already won. The courthouse in Cedar Hollow smelled of pine polish and dust, like time itself lingered there. I sat at the defendant's table, hands folded tight, while the town stared holes through me. The prosecutor painted me as a bitter wife, jealous of Earl's success. Said I'd planned it. I said I wanted freedom. He waved Earl's journal like scripture. Page after page, Earl had written of a wife ungrateful, unstable, dangerous. He'd planted the story long before he died. Then came the worst blow, my own children took the stand. Ruth, 17, her hair pulled back neat, her eyes cold as winter. She said I was always angry, always distant. That she feared me more than her daddy. When she heard the shot, she wasn't surprised. Daniel, 14, smaller but already carrying his father's shadow. He wouldn't look at me. He just repeated what they told him, Mama had a temper, Mama couldn't be trusted. Each word is another nail in the coffin Earl had built for me even in death. I wanted to scream. To tell them the truth, that Earl had poisoned their minds, turned them against me one cruel word at a time. But the courtroom isn't a place for screams. It's a place for order. And order belongs to men like Earl, even in the grave. When the jury filed back in, I already knew. The foreman's voice was steady, rehearsed, guilty of murder in the second degree. My knees nearly buckled, but I stood tall. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall. Judge Holloway's gavel came down hard. 20 years, parole after 10. The courtroom buzzed like a hive. My children sat stone-faced, not a tear shed for me. In their eyes, I was already gone. As the bailiff took my arm, I thought of that night in the farmhouse, of the rifle's weight, of the silence that followed the shot. I had chosen survival, but the cost was everything else I had ever loved. That was the end of Marlene Carter, the wife, the mother, the woman folks thought they knew. In her place stood the widow of Cedar Hollow. And prison was waiting. If you've been following Marlene's story, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves gripping true stories, and subscribe to the channel. They called it prison. I called it a graveyard where the dead still walked. The bus ride there was quiet, except for the rattle of chains and the hum of the tires on asphalt. Women around me stared out the windows with hollow eyes, some crying, some cursing. I sat straight, staring at nothing, because I had nothing left to cry over. When the gates of Huntsville Women's Correctional Facility clanged shut behind me, I felt the final nail seal my coffin. I was no longer Marlene Carter, wife of Earl, mother of Ruth and Daniel. I was inmate number 44216. A number stamped on my chest like cattle. Prison strips you down, piece by piece. The uniform, the buzz cut, the metal bunk that clanged every time you turned in your sleep. Even your name stops belonging to you. Guards barked orders like drill sergeants, and if you didn't move fast enough, you paid for it. But the thing about prison is, it forces you to learn. You either crumble, or you grow sharper than the fences that cage you in. The first few months, I kept to myself. Didn't talk much, didn't trust anybody. Women in there could smell weakness the way a wolf smells blood. Some tried me, shoves in the chow line, whispers in the shower. I held my ground. I'd spent 24 years surviving Earl Carter. Prison wasn't about to break me worse than he did. In time, they left me alone. I found refuge in the library. Shelves of worn-out paperbacks, Bibles with half the pages torn, law books donated by some university up north. I started reading. At first just to pass the time. Then, because the words made sense of things I'd lived through. Cases of women who killed their husbands after years of abuse. Legal arguments about self-defense, diminished capacity, battered wife syndrome. Words that might have saved me if someone had cared enough to use them. The more I read, the more I became a jailhouse scholar. Women would come to me with letters, appeals, parole forms they didn't understand. I helped them write, helped them tell their stories in neat words that boards and judges respected. In that place, knowledge was currency, and I traded it well. Even so, nights were the hardest. The cell was cold, and the dark had a way of pressing against you like a weight. Sometimes I'd hear Earl's voice echo in the walls, taunting, reminding me that even dead he owned me. But as the years dragged on, his ghost grew smaller. His words became whispers instead of storms. 12 years I served before parole came. By then, my hair was streaked with gray, my back stiffer than it had been at 19 when I walked down the aisle in a borrowed lace dress. The day they cut me loose, the sun felt strange on my skin. Too bright, too open. I walked out with a plastic bag of state-issue clothes and a heart too heavy to lift. No one waited for me outside the gates. No children with tears in their eyes, no family with arms wide. Just silence, broken by the buzz of cicadas in the trees. I rented this trailer on the edge of Cedar Hollow, paint peeling, roof rusting. Folks in town knew who I was, even after all those years. Whispers followed me through the grocery store. Eyes watched me at the diner. To them, I was still the woman who shot her husband. Nothing more, nothing less. My children, they never came. Never wrote. I learned through gossip that Ruth moved to Georgia, married a banker. Daniel joined the army, stationed out west. They built their lives without me, carrying Earl's story instead of mine. I wanted to hate them for it, but I couldn't. They were as much Earl's victims as I was. Maybe more. Sometimes, late at night, I write them letters I never send. Letters where I tell them the truth, the bruises, the storms, the silence. I beg them to remember the mother who once rocked them under the pecan tree, not the one painted as a murderer in court. But the letters pile up in a drawer, unsent, because I know the truth, they've buried me already. And yet, despite it all, I breathe. Some mornings I sit on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the mist rise off the fields. The world looks almost gentle in those moments. Other mornings, I feel the weight of every stare, every whisper, pressing me down like chains I'll never escape. I've asked myself 1,000 times if I regret it. If I regret pulling that trigger. If I regret trading freedom for silence. The answer is complicated. I regret losing my children. I regret the years behind bars. I regret the way Cedar Hollow spits my name like it's poison. But Earl? No. I don't regret ending the storm that was Earl Carter. If I hadn't done it, he'd have finished me. And then I'd be buried in a churchyard, remembered as that poor wife who couldn't handle her husband. Instead, I'm remembered as the widow who fought back. That's not the legacy I wanted. But it's the one I earned. So here I sit, Marlene Carter, widow of Cedar Hollow. A woman marked by one night, one bullet, one choice. Some folks call me a monster. Some call me a cautionary tale. But I call myself something else. A survivor. And that's the truth they'll never take from me. You spend a lifetime swallowing silence, and it settles in your bones like dust on old furniture. For years, I carried mine in locked drawers of memory, believing no one wanted to hear. But silence is a kind of death, and tonight I wanted to live. I tell my story now because the shadows no longer frighten me, and because maybe, just maybe, there's someone listening who needs to know they're not alone. The scars on our skin fade, but the ones on the heart teach us how to stand taller, how to breathe deeper, how to claim tomorrow even after yesterday tried to bury us. If you've walked through storms like mine, know this: you are not broken beyond repair. You are not your pain. You are the seed that still pushes through cracked earth, reaching for light. And if my words linger in you, let them be a hand on your shoulder, a quiet whisper that survival is its own kind of victory. Before I go, I ask gently, leave me a little trace in this wide world. Like this story, share it with someone who might need its truth, and subscribe so you can walk with me into the next chapter. My name once was Marlene Carter, but here, in the telling, I am something else, something freer. I am simply a survivor. And with these words, I close the door to yesterday, and open the window to tomorrow.